Hello, my name is Bret. This is my show, and I'm here every Thursday talking about containers and DevOps and all those things. So, thanks for joining me live here, all of you in the chat. A lot of hellos today from all over. It's always exciting to read where everybody's coming from and to just chat over the internet. So, in case this is your first time and you just happen to show up, or maybe you're watching a replay of this and wondering why I'm talking on the internet and why we're hanging out. This is a live show I do every week. It is largely coming from the students that I have in all of my courses, now 4 and growing, all related around DevOps. And we've been doing this for years. I think my first course was about 3.5 years ago. And I've been doing this DevOps stuff since before it was called DevOps. So I've got a lot of to talk about. So I thought I'd just share it with you. So let's get to the questions. This hour is going to be all about questions. I don't have a guest this week, so it's going to be all about you and your questions about my courses, about just your job, all the things you got to deal with in that crazy world of, you must know everything about all technology. That's the kind of problem that it's like being in IT. And I've had some of those moments recently with all the Apple updates and all these devices coming out. People just assume that you know. And so let's talk about it. First up, let's just really quick cover this show as well as the podcast, which I just finally released another one yesterday, as well as all my open source content on GitHub and other stuff that I don't want to talk about yet because it's not ready yet. But when it's ready, we'll share it on the show. All that stuff is free and open. It's like I consider it open content, just like open source. And it's all now sponsored by you on my Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/Bret Fisher, you should see something that looks like this. Actually, no, not like that. How about like this? Yes. All right. So this is my home on Patreon, and this is where you can get a membership. It's optional. You don't have to do the membership, but if you would like to buy me a coffee every month, I really, really appreciate it. It keeps us motivated, keeps us going, and you get a couple of things. One of those is we're all in little, Patreon chat, stuff like that. But really the thing we do now that I'm getting ready to schedule for later this month is the DevOps Coffee Hangouts hour that we basically do once a month, where we all get in a Zoom chat. And it's mostly professionals or people looking to get into DevOps that are wanting to learn from other professionals. And we just talk about what we're working on. We talk about, issues we're having. Maybe we're looking for opinions from the group. And it's usually a dozen or so people, maybe more, that come and hang out. And you can also click that little follow button right there, and you'll get all of the releases of everything I'm doing, including major updates to my open source on GitHub, any new content I'm working on, which I'm working on some new blog posts and some other videos. So you'll hear news about that stuff eventually. And you can just click and follow, and you use the Patreon app or you get the Patreon emails. And it's kind of like your own private Twitter stream of just the things I'm releasing. And then if you'd like to become a member and get some extra benefits, feel free. Also, if you have ideas for things you'd like to be in the memberships and you're a member, just go ahead, get in there, DM me, give me an idea of what you'd like to see as part of a membership package, and I'll consider it. Like, why not? Let's do it. Let's give away some more cool stuff. So yeah, we're having fun over there. Come check that out. Obviously, if you're watching on Twitch, you can see that we're on Twitch, we're on Periscope, I'm on YouTube. Like, these are all the 3 places that I hang out at. So you watch where you prefer to watch, and everything ends up on YouTube eventually. So, whether I make a little video or maybe I make a clip of a video, which we just did for this recent podcast yesterday. The podcast yesterday that was released was an edited down version of a conversation I had about Kubernetes ingress, specifically Contour and Gimbal. Contour is a Kubernetes project that works with Envoy proxy, and it allows you to have custom ingress coming into your Kubernetes clusters. And then Gimbal is a separate project, but related. It is essentially the ingress for multiple Kubernetes clusters. So if you ever go to Kubernetes in production, you will likely have multiple Kubernetes clusters. You may have more than one in production. You may just have one in production, one in test, that kind of setup. But eventually, you're going to have many of them, and you need to figure out how to get from one cluster to another. Like, what if you completely replace your cluster? Some companies do that. That would be a pretty cool thing for you to do instead of trying to do an upgrade in place, which is a little more nerve-wracking on Kubernetes, because if suddenly the etcd database doesn't upgrade correctly, now your Kubernetes cluster isn't functioning at 100%. So if you just go over to podcast.bretfisher.com, you can check out the latest one where we talk about that stuff, latest episode there. And of course, you can subscribe in all of the podcast players around the world. All right. So what do we got in chat? What are we talking about? So before we even went live, Serenitude, I'm going to try that one. Serenitude asked a question about digests for Ubuntu. So would you recommend sticking with the latest Ubuntu focal image then? Just making sure I got all of your question. So the question was specifically around a super stable Ubuntu 2004 focal LTS image, rather, not TLS, but LTS image that I can use as a base for Rails and React monolith. Do you have any recommendations for a particular digest? I don't want to have to change it later. So it doesn't actually matter what digest or what hash or which patch version of Ubuntu that you start with, because any system that you're going to take production is going to change over time. One of the things that containers do for you, and of course you didn't mention in your question about containers, you said React Rails monolith, which should still be in a container. You should absolutely put that in a Docker container just because it's a monolith. We've had tons and tons of monoliths. I would argue that a vast majority of Docker containers are monoliths. And the reason that it's so important that you put that in a container is for this exact reason, is an OS has to change over time. You need to be security patching that thing every month. And in fact, the minute you get a server and you're getting ready to consider deploying an app on it, usually one of the first things an operator or sysadmin will do is fully patch it and then run a scanner on it just to make sure that it's up to the patch level they expect. They have all of the vulnerabilities that they're concerned about protected, right? They might do a network scan just to make sure the ports that they don't want open are not exposed, stuff like that, right? So you're sort of checking that system before you go live with it. But the next thing you're going to do is once you put your app on it, you're going to need to patch it again, because if you add new apt-get things in 3 days or 2 weeks, some of those things are going to have security patches. And in fact, on Ubuntu, it's kind of nice because when you first log in, I think the first time every day in SSH, it will say something like, there are a certain number of updates. So many of those are updates for security. Now, I'm not sure whether those little things that happen on the SSH message of the day, I don't think those are related to application packages. I think they're more focused on system packages. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But the point here is that this thing will change. Now, the point of a Docker container, one of the main benefits is that you have your application and its dependencies protected from OS changes. So OS changes, like let's say there's an OS-based Python update, right? Because someone does apt-get update on the host. They just do an apt-get update, and you didn't pin those packages for your applications, because most people don't, even though we totally should. If you didn't pin those applications, that means they're not going to, pin's actually the wrong word. In apt-get, it's reserved or some other term. But basically, it's a fixed package that won't get updated during a normal update cycle. Now, someone goes and does an apt-get update or apt update, now that you can just do that. And that updates everything on the system, including all the dependencies of your app, including maybe even like the MongoDB driver in a PHP app if you're using Peckle or Pear or any of the other PHP package managers. That's happened to me. I recall those days when I did a system update. It actually broke the app after the reboot. And that's one of the things that Docker's meant to save you from. So it will freeze the things in the package so that after the reboot, everything in that Docker container will stay the same. It was not affected by the apt-get update on the host. Now, the way you update that image is that you have your CI testing tools and you're rebuilding a new image. You're testing in that image. You're doing all your application-based testing. And then when you're comfortable, you ship that image down to the server through either a Docker run, a Docker pull and Docker run if you want to be more verbose. If you're doing Kubernetes, you're going to update your manifest. If you're using Swarm, you're going to update your compose file, right? So that's the key workflow there, is that the OS now is separated from the app. There's this sort of, imagine a demarcation line, almost like a firewall between those two, and that's the key. So when I talk about this stuff, I don't actually care about the Ubuntu version because I know that stuff's going to change often, at least every month, possibly every few weeks, depending on my security team and whether they're concerned about a new security patch. Sometimes day zero security patches come out and we need to go patch right now. So we have to go patch the servers. And then the image, the application is unchanged, and we can evaluate that separately with a separate process. But if you're putting this right on the host with no Docker, then yeah, it's a crapshoot. It may break your app. It may not when you do an apt update. I think at a minimum, if you're, if it was me, I would just do Docker. But in the old days, what we would do is we would pin those application versions so that they wouldn't accidentally get changed. And then we would manually evaluate each one of those during a patching cycle and test them with our application in CI. But I haven't done that stuff in 5 years since Docker showed up on the scene. So I recommend you use Docker. All right, let's keep the questions going. That was a really long answer. I hope that helped. As all my answers tend to be long. What's up, Ray Dog? My friend Ray is out there saying hello from the Virgin Islands. All right. Oh, look at this. A local. Tutco. Tutco. Hey, Bret, disappointed there's no air show this weekend. My aunt and uncle live in Virginia, and I come down for it every year. You didn't actually miss all of it because they've been flying all week. In fact, if we're lucky, during the show, you will hear what sounds like a bus crashing into my house. That's the sound of fighter jets flying over top of our house because they've been flying over the whole city all week, and I think they're filming a virtual air show. So I don't know all the details, but I believe you're going to be able to watch the air show online, and they're filming it somehow. I don't know if they got GoPros and jets and they're just filming each other. I don't know if it's all from the ground. I'm curious to see how it's going to turn out. But they have definitely been flying and practicing all week, which is what they do every year in September. It's a hoot, but it's also really hard to record a video without screaming jets over your head. All right. Hello, all the way in India. In France. Paul's back. Another question. On Docker Hub, I have a private repo with an automated build. That's normal. Looking at the stats, it says my image has been pulled 4 times. I've not pulled it at all yet. Any idea? Any ideas? Okay, so an image pull can simply be an image check. So what is an image, right? The Docker captains have been talking about this for the last couple of months because Docker has tried to, they've announced some limits that they're going to put together in the fall about what is an image. And an image is not really a single thing. An image is a combination, if we're talking about bits, right? It's a combination of a manifest file and then a bunch of tarballs, and each one is a layer. So I think what you're going to find is that on Docker Hub, the word image likely applies more to the manifest than to the actual tarballs. And the manifest might simply be an application, and it could be some of the build stuff, simply going and checking what's the latest version, or maybe doing a quick check of the manifest before it does a push, because if you're building, then technically what's happening in the background is that that registry is running an automated tool that is packaging up each layer and then pushing it up to the registry, right? So there's probably a pull going on there in part of that process. It could be one of your local tools, because if you do something like you do a Docker compose up dash dash pull, if you do Docker swarm deploy, if you do any kind of Kubernetes manifest stuff, there are lots of occasions in there where it will simply check for the presence of the image, or maybe the latest digest of the image before, and it won't actually pull anything, right? So I wouldn't worry about the pull count. I would say that if you simply uploaded an image, didn't have any automated build tools, and never typed in any additional command, and then you saw those numbers increase at a steady rate, I would probably be concerned then. But private images are private, so I wouldn't be worried about some sort of 0-day bug that nobody knows about, because like basically the whole world uses Docker-based registries. So that's one of the core features, is that we hope the privates stay private, and I would trust that. So my guess is it's the Docker Hub build tools. All right, good question. Howdy from Vancouver. Nice. Love Canada. Can't wait to get back there after all of our basically after we all either get a vaccine or we get COVID. Basically, at this point, it's going to be years of just dealing with it. Thanks for recommending my course. I appreciate it. Thanks for taking it. I'm glad you're a fan. Los Angeles, good luck everyone out there on the West Coast and in the Northwest from all the fires. We're here on the East Coast. It's, in case you haven't heard on the news, we're actually getting the smoke from all the fires out there. It's coming all the way across the country, and it's made the sky foggy. Obviously, we can't smell it, but we're all thinking about you, and we hope you stay safe. What's the difference? Let's see. Kamaraju? I'm going to try that name. I probably messed it up, but what is the difference between earlier Docker versions and edge computing Docker? All right, well, there's a couple of questions there. When you say edge, there's a special version of Docker Desktop called Edge. Edge computing usually means IoT. So I'm not sure what you're asking. If you're asking, is Docker different on IoT? And the answer there is no, it's not. Docker is exact. If you get an official build of Docker, regardless of the platform or the device you're running it on, it's the same binary. It operates the same way. It does the same things. If you're talking about the difference between regular sort of stable Docker and Edge, there is technically no Edge Docker engine anymore. There is only Edge Docker Desktop, and that's simply for them to push out not beta versions of Docker engine, but simply sort of beta-like features of Docker Desktop. I've been running Edge the entire time Docker Desktop has existed, and I've had very little issues. So I'm not recommending that everyone, do Edge, but I find it's a very stable product because mostly they're not shipping you beta Docker engine, which is the core. They're just shipping you, they're trying new GUI features out and new GUI functionality. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Hello, St. Paul. Oh, Sao Paulo, sorry. Brazil. My fonts are really small. I need to increase this so I don't have... Okay. Biker's back with a weird one. We moved our Moodle server. I don't know what Moodle is. From a VM to a container. External NFS storage. Worked fine until Moodle choked on NFS for the session files. Moved that one file to Redis. Okay, any idea why an application would not work with NFS storage? I would say the number one reason that it doesn't work with NFS storage is due to just latency. Also, if you've got, I don't know if if multiple containers are trying to talk to NFS storage, but you often can't have multiple applications talking to the same file on NFS in a read-write fashion. So, the questions I would ask there are looking at the round-trip latency and the expectation of the app just maybe timing out, because NFS latency is, compared to local disk and SSD and things like Redis, it is extremely high latency to go to over the network to NFS. I mean, it's fast relative to traditional spinning disks, maybe, assuming that NFS is SSD. But I would then ask, is your NFS SSD? So I would say basically it's a time issue, or it's only one file can be written to at a time. So there's a read lock. Sorry, there's a write lock on that file, and it's causing other containers with the same application, assuming you got multiple replicas. That's also an issue. That's what I would look at next. It says it worked fine until it choked on NFS for session files. So it sounds like it was working and then suddenly not working. And so, if you wanted to debug it further, it would be a question of at what point does it stop working? That would help you narrow in on the why. So was it the number of sessions? Was it just the first session that made it break? Was it many sessions at the same time? I have lots of questions. So that's how I would kind of go about it, troubleshooting. Could you please share some security best practices? I will say, by the way, Biker, though, session files and NFS for applications, I don't see people doing that, just because it usually is not a great experience. I wouldn't say that's exactly the problem you're having, but session files and NFS, like, either the two ways I see it are either session state across applications are either kept locally, which is a problem because then you have to maintain the session upstream in like a load balancer so that you can ensure each person gets the same computer with the same local session state, or they're using a database type solution for shared session state, so that any application can look up the session state on the back end, like Redis or MySQL or something. So that's what I see. I don't see NFS used for file-based session state, simply because I don't know where or why that would be used, because applications can't write to the same file at the same time. They could be stepping on each other's toes if they were all using the same session directory. So then they'd have to use separate session directories, which would negate the benefits of NFS for shared storage. So I hope that makes sense. Could you please share some security best practices for Docker and Node.js apps? So yes, I already have a lot of that. So most of the security stuff is going to be in, let's see, bret.show/security first. So I will share this URL in chat for you, Sanjay. I will share that one, and that is my go-to list. It's not Node.js specific because most of the things in Docker security are not application specific. And most of the things in your application that are security specific don't change regardless of where your app's loading, right? Like, obviously, doing something like npm audit in your CI to make sure that you're properly security patching your Node app, that doesn't matter where it runs, right? It could be running in serverless. It could be running on a traditional monolith server with no Docker. It could be running in Docker. It could be running Kubernetes. Doesn't matter. That's a standard practice for npm and Node.js. But that has nothing to do with Docker or servers. So that list I gave you is specifically for servers that are running Docker or Kubernetes or Swarm or something like that. Also, you should probably check out my Node.js course. You can get a link for all the best coupons down below, because that's going to help you adopt Node.js in terms of just general best practices, not security, but generally how to use Node.js the best way I know how. I wouldn't say it's the best way, but it's the best way I know how in Docker with Swarm and Kubernetes, right? So that's a course, and you can totally get that down below if you're on YouTube. If not, just go over to bretfisher.com. The coupons are all there. Just click on courses, and I've got some course coupons there. All right. Can you explain the network's property in a Docker compose file? I got it with traffic. sometimes we can have external true or external false and multiple networks for containers. I'm confused. All right, Christian. So what you're talking about is specifically in Docker Compose, and when external true simply means that Docker Compose is not going to create that network or Swarm. So the Compose file that you're talking about is used by Swarm or Compose, and when you say external true, it simply means you've already created it on your own. I don't normally need that. I normally just external false is the default, so I don't normally have to specify external true. But in some people's setups, what they do is if they have let's say a single Docker network just for traffic proxy, right? And it might be in a couple of my examples to have external true. So you might go and you do like a Docker network create proxy, and so you've manually created that and you've named it proxy, and then you use it in all of your Compose files, and you're not telling Compose to create it. You're simply saying, hey, Compose, this already exists. And then you do that by setting external equals true. And then multiple networks for containers, that's how you do network isolation. So we don't do VLANs in Docker. We don't do separate physical networks in Docker. We don't really have firewalls in Docker networks. The way we consider it is multiple networks. So if you have an application that is a traditional 3-tier application, and let's say you have the web front end, it might be on a Docker network called front end. And it only needs to talk to the API. And then the API sits on another space here, but it's actually connected to the same front-end network and an additional second network called backend. And the API needs to talk to the database, and the database is only going to be on a network called backend. So that's 2 separate Docker networks, and that means that the front end over here can't see or talk to the database that's on the backend network. The API sits in the middle on both networks. So that's, instead of thinking of TCP routing, right, when you would think of normally a router that you would make routing rules for how things get around and setting up firewall rules, the way that you route, I guess I could air quote that, things in Docker with Docker networks is you create more networks and you only put the things on each network that need to talk to each other on that network. If you want to isolate something, you create a new network, put it on that network, and then only connect the things that it needs to talk to that network. So you might end up with some applications, like a shared database server might be on 5 different networks in Docker. And that's how you ensure that it talks to each app. So hope that makes sense. But you, for example, in that case, would not put the Docker database container on the proxy network, right? Because that might be up in the front with your proxies and where all your client connections are coming in, and you wouldn't want that database to be exposed, so thus you would not put it on that network. That's a little bit different of a concept. I go through that all the way on in the Docker Mastery course. We go through Docker networks as well as through Docker Compose. So you can check out those course links up below or up above. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. How do you manage secrets? env, JSON, YAML variables. Which one are you using for secrets management? So it depends on whether you're talking about Swarm, Docker, because Docker doesn't have secrets. Docker Compose, the command line tool, doesn't have secrets. It kind of has support, but they don't really work the way you think, and they're not really secret. It's sort of emulating that just so it can support for local development use the idea of the functionality. Because again, Docker Compose is not for servers. You use something like Swarm on servers, or Kubernetes on servers, or Nomad, or whatever. Or you just use plain Docker. But Docker itself and Docker Compose, the command line tool, don't have the ability to encrypt anything, and they don't have a database to store encryption. So yeah, they're not going to be able to do that. However, Swarm does, Kubernetes does. And so I don't know. So secrets management is a process of learning where you're going to keep your secrets. So let's say you got a Kubernetes cluster. Great. You're going to keep them in Kubernetes. That means you need to encrypt the database, the etc database, which is why I always recommend using a cloud provided or a vendor provided, because they're always going to ensure that the encryption is set up correctly and that things are properly secured. And then you can dump those secrets into there, and then away you go. So I'm not sure exactly what the rest of your question is about, because it's really per use case, right? If your application needs to get the secret, but it can only get it through an environment variable, then you're going to have, in the case of Kubernetes, you would have Kubernetes set that secret up inside of your pod spec. You would have your secret exposed as an environment variable, right? So that your application could see it inside the container. If your application can support secrets in files, even better, because files are a little bit safer. They don't tend to leak into logs like environment variables do. So you set that up with Kubernetes in terms of your deployment spec, your pod spec, whatever you're doing. You would expose it there. The same thing is happening in Swarm, right? You're going to specify the secret by name or by ID, and then it will expose it in the container. In Swarm, it always does it as a file inside of your container. And these things are never written to disk, unencrypted. So inside their containers, they're always in memory. Whenever they're stored in the database for long term, they're encrypted, right? I don't store secrets inside of other files traditionally. I try to use them individually. That way, because if you store a single file with a bunch of secrets in it, in a secret, then that means every time you want to change one of them, you got to change the whole thing. And that can probably be a little more work. So, hopefully that answers your question. If not, hello. Glad I helped there. Yeah, okay. Mike, updates to your awesome K8s course soon. Yes. In fact, I just put it in some stuff about the podcast. So if you listen to yesterday's podcast, I talked a little bit about what we're going through right now, which is the 118 update. Now that everyone is getting used to 118 and we're starting to see 118 in the wild in big distributions, we're going. There's over a dozen videos that have to be changed. It's probably going to be close to 20 videos that have to be changed because 118 broke so much stuff. So we're doing that first. So you'll see an announcement about that coming soon. I don't have a launch date, but we're going through that, and then we're going to get back to that storage section. That was the one coming up next. We were getting a lot of people saying it was hard to go through the videos because now all of the things like Docker Desktop and Micro K8s and Minikube, they were all installing 118 by default, and it was not going well for people in the course. So we felt that it was, our first rule in the courses is to keep them functioning as is, keep them working, and then to add new content. So unfortunately, I had to pause the storage section that's coming out next in order to fix those videos. But thanks for asking. I would love to join your K8s course. Where do you share it? Well, you probably heard the answer, and I keep pointing in the wrong direction, but up there at bret.live, bretfisher.com, or just if you're on YouTube, the link's down below. They'll give you all the course links with all the best coupons on the internets. Do I know why Docker Engine consumes a lot of memory on the Windows host on WSL2? Well, Docker isn't going to consume. So when you say Docker Engine, I would not assume that it consumes any more memory on WSL2 that it consumes on any Linux host, because WSL2 is really just a Linux host. So I'm not sure if you're specifically talking about Docker Desktop, which uses a lot more memory. I would say if you think you have a bug, or if you're concerned that someone else might want to know about your issue, all you need to do is jump over to the GitHub issues. You may already know about those, but I'll just share those. So they are over at github.com/docker/4win. And so if you go into the 4win repo, and then under issues, you can search the issues there for memory. So I will tell you that WSL2 is pretty early days, right? And I know that both the Docker team and the Windows team are working feverishly on improving a lot of the edge cases, performance issues. Memory usage is definitely one of them. Specifically for WSL2, I'm not aware that Docker Engine itself is using a lot more RAM on WSL2 than it would on normal Linux, but that could be a thing. I just haven't heard anyone talking about it. So I am certainly not aware of all problems, considering that there's 1,000 open tickets on the 4win repo. That's a lot. But there's a lot of people using it. Millions of people use Docker Desktop for Windows. So hope that answers your question. Joined a new company, and for deployment, we're using Doku. Haven't heard of it before. Any views on it? Yes, I haven't heard anything on it recently, but years ago I heard something about it. But I have not used it. I don't really know anyone directly that uses it. But if it solves your problems and it's working well, why not? I would say, don't, just because you haven't heard of a tool. I mean, there's so many tools out there. Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't mean you should jump ship from it or recommend a different one. What I always do is, when you approach it from DevOps, from a mindset of a DevOps engineer, a person who's responsible for part of the DevOps life cycle, I would approach it from, are my business objectives getting met? Are my staff able to automate things? Are we able to monitor things and provide metrics? And if that system is getting in the way of all that, then I would start looking at things you might be more familiar with. But until then, I'd say keep on doing it and let us know how you like it. Hello from Argentina. Nice. Got some Docker captains down there, by the way. You should go check it out. Any guidance on Docker stack deploy versus individual Docker service CLI commands? Like the idea of declarative, but I hate CI having to edit parts of YAML. Okay. T-Tutco, Tom. So Tom, that you don't have to do that. CI does not have to edit your YAML. So typically in your CI, you're going to be worried about things like environment variables and image tags, right? Because if you think about it, you're building a new image, and then you're going to have to change the tag that you're deploying. So what you do is, because if your CI is doing the CD, and then it's going to be doing the stack deploy command, right? Because I like declarative too. So let's see how we can do that. Jump over to the compose spec, Docker compose. Go check out the compose file, and if you go all the way to the bottom of that page, way down at the bottom, very end, you're going to get, let's see, some environment variable stuff. I'm going to pop this out so I can, a little too big for me to, there we go. Okay, so down at the bottom of that compose page, I'll send you a link here in chat. Variable substitution, all right? And in the variable substitution, oops, it works just like this. So you can, basically what you're going to do is you're going to have CI set up environment variables for all the things it needs to change regularly. Like, I don't know what you're passing in, maybe some environment variables like dev, test, or maybe there's some secrets that you need to pass from CI because you're not fully storing them in Docker secrets yet or something. So you're going to do all that, and then you're going to have all this templating inside of the YAML. Now, YAML supports templating out of the box, and Docker stack deploy supports bringing those in from the environment. So in the shell, essentially, that you're running the Docker stack from. So if CI sets those environment variables and then runs the Docker stack deploy on this YAML, then you never needed to edit YAML. I recommend that. That's going to work well for you. That's what I do. So check it out and report back. Report back on your success or struggles. We always like to hear, stories from the field of people taking recommendations and running with them and then hitting more roadblocks. Let's see. I want to deploy on Swarm Stack. Hamid, it runs gracefully. Good. It is not mean delay. I want to deploy, wait until all session finish complete, and then apply deploy. What should I do? Let's see. I'm not sure I understand the question. It runs gracefully. I want to wait. I want deploy to wait until all sessions are finished completing and then apply deploy. What should I do? I'm not exactly sure of your question. So it sounds like it's something related to something starting before something else, right? So Feel free to, by the way, clarify the question if you want a little bit to help me understand it. But one of the things that we talk about, I talk about a lot on this show, and I talk about in some of my courses, is wait for it, which is a general term that we talk about in distributed computing where you need something to wait for something else. Now, I will say that you shouldn't need this. Ideally, if you control your applications, every single one of your applications should have a retry. Because you can, in a distributed computing environment, you can't control all the things. You can't control, what if the network goes down? What if the Docker network has a hiccup? What if the backend database goes down? And, these are all things that require some sort of intelligence in your apps. Including things that are talking to the API or the things, so the API is talking to the database or the queue. All these things need something like a retry. And so if you have access to the code and you're able to control the code, all applications nowadays need to have all the things retry. At a minimum, if they can't do retries, or even if they do retries, we have, I'm forgetting the term in the industry, but a reduced functionality essentially. So when you have, let's say you have a web front end and it needs to talk to a couple of APIs and maybe a queue of some sort. And that web front end will have, at any given time, one of those things could go down. Or maybe the different particular container that's running, talking to, has a problem. So it's now in a reduced set of functionality because part of it's broken. Many bad apps will just simply error out and they'll just give you a 503 or some sort of generic error for the entire app. But more intelligent apps that we all are now having to design, because we're all building these distributed apps. And distributed apps require more intelligence because they're distributed. We can't be certain they're on the same system, all performing the same thing at the same time. So since they're spread out across all these networks, whether they're virtual or physical, maybe your front-end app's intelligence is that, well, if this particular part of the API is down, then I'm going to basically give you a friendly error message, but allow the rest of the application to still work. And that is the kind of intelligence you'll see in higher end applications, right? The big fancy applications out there won't just simply give you a 503. They will give you a subset of the functionality, or at best, or at worst rather, they will sort of redirect you to a page that gives you something to do while you're waiting for the problems to get fixed, right? So that's the fanciest part. Ideally, what you're really doing is just building the apps with their own intelligence for retry. And then it doesn't matter the order they start in. Now, there are lots of other things that could be going on here. I'm not sure what you're talking about. You could be talking about needing to do, database schema updates before you update the application. These are all challenges that don't really have anything to do with Swarm. They have to do with designing your application for distributed computing. And so one of the books that I often recommend is going out and looking for books on distributed computing. Right? So there's something like this. I'm just going to Google it real quick. There's an O'Reilly book, Designing Distributed Systems. So I'm not sure if you're a developer or a operator, but if you're a developer, definitely recommend books like this. Any books that talk about programming languages, specifically to distributed computing, because it takes more work. We have to all assume that the rest of the parts of our app aren't always going to be up, and that we have to maybe buffer or retry or both, or do reduced functionality to the upstream system, right? That's requesting stuff of us. So the last thing I will tell you is that if you just you can't do anything about the applications, you can't change the applications, and you simply have to wait, then the best things I've seen for Swarm are doing something like wait for it. Here's one. Just search wait for it. So here's a wait for it script. Wait until an address becomes available. So basically, you would make a bash script that starts on your container startup that maybe checks something else to wait for it to be available. You could actually use curl for this if you wanted. You could. There's lots of other tools out there. There are libraries that you can add. These are, though, temporary workarounds because they're really only addressing the startup problem. They're not addressing the larger problem, which is how does your application handle it when its dependencies aren't available? That's the bigger problem that you got to really address. But I would say until then, look for the wait for it. stuff. And then if you have that problem in CI, you can always wrap your stack deploy commands with wait for it's that wait for other services to be available before they spin up their updates, right? So I hope that helps. That's a lot of stuff. I know. I just said a lot of things. What does the K8 share out of 10 to accomplish DevOps? 0. You do not need Kubernetes to accomplish DevOps. There is no single tool that will make you more DevOps. What is important is that you implement DevOps practices and that you focus on business goals and metrics. And then once you know what your goals are and what you need to achieve, you can use any tool to approach a DevOps goal, right? So any tool you see in the market that says a DevOps tool, they're lying to you because they're misusing the term. They're and I'm guilty of this, so I might be lying to you a little bit myself. In my titles of my courses, I will put the word DevOps in simply because that's the word we all use. But I'm being a little snarky here to say that you don't need a particular tool to achieve anything about DevOps, particularly something like Kubernetes. What will get you typically closer to a DevOps goal is any tool that helps you automate and recover faster. So automation, faster recovery, faster time to deployment, those are all things that are a part of the DevOps goal set. And Kubernetes just happens to be one of, 10,000 tools that can help you do that. So I think that tools like Docker and Kubernetes didn't necessarily come out of DevOps, but their ideas in inception were created by people that were aware of DevOps and were trying to automate and were trying to create higher uptimes and faster deployment times, right? So then they created some of these tools that we've seen lately. But there's plenty of people doing DevOps with 20-year-old tools like Chef and Puppet, right? There's plenty of people that are doing DevOps with scripts in Bash. So I don't want you to think that you have to have Kubernetes for DevOps because you don't. I help companies all the time implement faster deployment times, better monitoring, and better recovery, and we've never touched Kubernetes or even Docker Swarm for that matter. Maybe we're serverless. Maybe we're doing Lambdas. Maybe we're doing traditional servers with just Docker on them and nothing else. There's lots of ways to do it. So I don't know if that was a trick question, but I hope you like that answer and that it gets you a little bit closer to what you're trying to accomplish. Saeem, I am preparing for, hopefully I pronounced that name correctly. I'm preparing for a CKA exam, so I'm playing a lot with Kubeadmin tool. Because CKA exam, based on that, can you please guide me how to upgrade K8s root and not non-root user? Guide me how to upgrade K8s root and not non-root user. Can you ask that question a different way? I'm not sure what you're asking me. How to upgrade? Are you asking me how to upgrade a Kubernetes cluster without having root? I'm not sure what exactly the question is. So. If you could rephrase the last part of that sentence a little bit so I can figure it out. Basically, if you have to have, I don't know how you could ever, if that's what you're asking, I don't know how you could ever upgrade Kubernetes without root. And I'm assuming you're talking about Linux root on the Linux servers because there is no real root in Kubernetes. But yeah. All right. What build strategy would you suggest in a CI/CD system? We want to prefer rootless daemons to build. Rootless daemons are totally possible. So build with Docker rootless. All right, you can check out Docker rootless. Just search Docker rootless. I mean, Docker is the most full-featured rootless. So Docker has both documentation on this. Run the daemon as a non-root user. Okay. You can also run Docker in Docker, so you could have Docker on the host and then Docker running inside it. You could actually install Docker rootless as a normal user using Let's see, the script at git.docker.com/rootless. So I will share that script with you. So just like there's the git.docker.com script, yeah, and so then you could do that. So I would do that. I would keep it with Docker. I would look into the buildx command. So look up docker buildx. That is the new builder that is faster and has a lot more functionality. And I share best books for advanced Docker and Kubernetes. Best books? Let's see. Advanced? I'm not sure about advanced. I would say that even though it's not labeled as an advanced book, I don't think of the name of it. So, go over to All In Geek. Actually, I'll just put this up here because it's on Manning, right? So there's an updated version of this book, and it's got tons of details in it on Docker. I think there's a lot of details in this book that are not in my 20-hour video course. So I would definitely check that book out if you're into reading. You've seen Jeff on this show before. He's another Docker captain, and I would check that out. I do not have on my list of things a advanced Kubernetes book. I'm thinking at this point, an advanced Kubernetes book is probably going to look something like looking at service mesh. If you look at service mesh and look at books on Istio or any other service mesh, that is probably advanced Kubernetes, because Kubernetes itself doesn't really change. You might look up things like troubleshooting Kubernetes and see if there's books out there on that. I haven't read any of them, so I can't give a recommendation on that. But I hope that helps. So if you're a beginner to K8s, this is actually a really good question, Manny. So what I would do is, yes, I would convert the compose tool, but I would never use that. Okay, I would only use the compose tool as a way to learn. And so take an existing compose file that you have, then use the compose tool, and then leave that, just look at it for a minute and then leave it aside. And then go through the effort, like I do in my Kubernetes mastery course, go through the effort of creating, I teach in the Kubernetes mastery course how to use the Kubernetes command line and the API documentation to create YAML from scratch. I recommend you do that for all of your services, just so that you know how they work, because there's something about the learning process. Our brains don't always work by just reading something once, right? When we get into something and we have to think about how to solve the problem in YAML, and we're forced to type it out manually, or we're forced to type the command lines to find which option we need, that it was in Compose, but now we need it in Kubernetes. There's something about that process that really makes things stick. And that's how I learn. I don't just learn by reading or watching something. I have to really get in there and learn it, or otherwise it's not going to stick. If I read my first Kubernetes book, and at least over half of it didn't stick in my brain. And I don't think after reading that book, I could have written one YAML without having to use the command line to discover the YAML. I could have just written one blank, right? So I would do that. I would go, yes, you can use the compose tool to check your results, but to me, the compose tool is like a crutch. If you don't understand what the YAML is doing, then you shouldn't be deploying Kubernetes anyway, right? Yeah, I wouldn't recommend you put your applications in Kubernetes if you don't know why that YAML file exists and you don't understand why those lines exist. At least I would never do that in a business. You might just do it for a hobby if you don't really know, but then I would be asking, why are you using Kubernetes, right? You know, if you're using Kubernetes, I'm assuming, one, you need it for business, or you're just using it to learn. And for both of those reasons, you need to know the YAML. So it's not about memorizing the YAML. I don't memorize the YAML. I simply learn the techniques in the command line and combined with the API docs, because there's a lot of really cool commands. that will let you discover all the different parts of the YAML that you need to add in. And so I usually will have two screens up, right? One where I'm writing and one where I'm typing kube control, API resources and kube control API versions. And then I'll type kube control explain commands, which helps me, it'll explain a whole lot of the stuff. Basically, that's the top 3 commands I would type as I'm writing my YAML file. And then I might reference the API docs in a web browser because it maybe is a little easier to read as with the command line. But those things combined will allow you to create every single thing in YAML that you need without resorting to compose. Using just the internet, just Google, or any of the other tools like the compose file or the compose tool with the K. It's so hard to say. It's like we need to call it K compose because it's confusing when I'm talking about all the different composes. So I would recommend that. And good luck. Good luck. What kind of strategies to decrease the size of Docker images in production? So I talk about this in my DockerCon 2019 talk a little bit. You may not be using Node.js, but that's okay. DockerCon 2019. So I will give you this repo. Go watch this video because I do talk about using slim images, using Alpine images, although I'm not always a fan of Alpine. You got to be very, very careful with Alpine. Yet another quarter has gone by and I was bitten by another Alpine bug. So, it's about once a quarter. I've been tracking for the last couple of years that either I or one of my customers has a problem with the Alpine-based images. So I tend to prefer slim Debians. So if you look for slim, that'll save you a lot of space. If you do multi-stage, which I talk about in that talk, so I use Node.js as an example, but it's almost all of that talk is not Node.js specific. I just happen to do it in the Node.js JavaScript language, but you could apply that to just about any other application. So hopefully that helps for that question there. All right. Docker secrets do not show up in run secrets when service is created using a Docker compose file. Had to use source and target in the compose file with target somewhere else than run secrets. I'm not sure if you're asking me a question there, but they should show up in secrets when you put them in a compose file. Remember, you got to put them both in the secrets down below and also in the service. You can put them somewhere else if you'd like. I actually wasn't aware that you could put a secret in a different location, and I'm in Docker secrets. I thought it had to be under run secrets if it was a secret, because that's the only place that there's a temp fs. But I could be wrong. They might have added extra functionality there, but from my understanding, it always has to be in secrets. All right. What's the upcoming feature that you are excited to see released or think it would be great to see in Docker, and why? I'm excited for them to finally release an update in 2020. I'm looking forward to any Docker engine release in 2020 because it will surely have some new things, and hopefully it will have the Swarms jobs feature. So we've had Swarm jobs in the master branch for 9 months now, and because we haven't had a major Docker release, we haven't had that show up. So that's probably because I don't know what else is coming in Docker engine. I'm not excited about any of the other features necessarily, but that would be my thing. Swarm secrets. I'm sorry. Swarm jobs. Swarm jobs. We need jobs. Hello from Cuba. Hello. How do I get Spanish subtitles? How do I get Spanish subtitles for the Docker Mastery course? So that's a great question. So if you go to the course, I'll do it right now. This is actually a pretty cool hack for anyone who's not a native English speaker. Let's see, if I go to course. So let's say I go to the course. Oh, I'm not signed in. Doggone it. And let me just go to let me think about this. well, maybe I can't demo it just this second, but what I was going to tell you is go get the plugin for Chrome or any browser that supports it, the Google Translate. I'm not spelling that right. Chrome plugin. So go get the Google Translate plugin. Okay. And then you can right click on the page, or you can basically in the course. Let me see if I can figure this out to just demo it real quick for you, because it is pretty neat. All right, so here we go. Let's say I'm in one of my courses and I click the closed captions, right? So, by the way, Spanish subtitles are there. So you can use the Spanish subtitles, right? So you could totally do that. Just use the ones that are there. But if it's a language that's not here, one of the cool things, and you can do this on any video on the internet that I'm aware of, is if you can get the subtitles up there at all, you can right click on the subtitles, and do I not have translate? All right, so no, I have translate. Why don't I see it? Oh, translate to English. Okay, so when I do that, okay, so let me actually change it to Spanish. I'm going to set to Spanish, and then I'm going to say, oh, where's the translate button? It keeps going away. Not translate to English. Oh, here it is, maybe up here. It's like it's changed on me. All right, well, this is supposed to work. I'm having a horrible demo fail here. But you should be able, I have done this before. We're in here, I'm translating the closed captioning. And don't know why is it because I have to play? No. Huh. Not working for me. So maybe it's broke, but you have the Spanish closed captions there and there, so it's kind of answering your question. There should be Spanish closed captions on all my courses. If not, let me know in the course. Send me like a DM or something. And I believe that Spanish is the one language, maybe even Portuguese, are the ones that are available in all my courses. So I hope that helps. All right. How to configure a network with 2 different applications, each in separate Docker container, communicating via UDP. Or is it better to keep them in one container? Well, networking sys, they just work by default. So, I mean, Docker containers can talk to each other over UDP. You would simply refer to their service name if you're using Docker Compose. They would use your container name if you're using a Docker custom network. You would just refer to them by that name, and then all their UDP ports are open by default. If you publish the UDP ports, then, -- publish, and then you would type in UDP / the port number, and that would publish the UDP port. By default, it assumes TCP, but if you just look up in the Docker documentation, right? If I just look up Docker compose file, and then if we go to publish, oh, come on. I'm in the compose file. So it's not the command line. I'm looking up ports. Yeah, so you'll see ports here. But if you do UDP ports, so in the ports example in here, it's a /UDP after the fact. So you would specify them in the compose file with /UDP. Hope that makes sense. Hello, Bret. Is there any play with Docker analog but for Windows containers? I am not aware of any, simply just due to the cost of Windows servers. Windows servers are expensive enough that no one wants to play with Docker with Windows containers. I would say that Docker usually does something like that around the birthdays, like when there's a Docker birthday, or in the fall, they sometimes have a Docker event, and they will spin up Windows versions for labs, especially if you're going to a meetup or online meetup, but those are not on very long, so I don't know of anyone that does it full time. What is the best practice for using IP address from the company's VLAN without conflict, which drives Mac VLAN IP VLAN? You would just assign the IP. If you have an assigned IP and you're going to use the Mac VLAN driver or the IP VLAN driver, then you just assign it in the compose file or at the command line, right? You can hard code the IP address that container is using. So look up in the docs, like I just was showing a while ago, the compose docs, the Docker run docs, they all support you giving it a specific IP address and subnet. So that's how I would do it. If you're given an IP for a container and you have to use that, then that's what you do. Is it possible to specify a secret config as optional in a compose file for Swarm to leave it up to containers to check if secret config exists? By default, stack won't start if config is missing. No, it is not possible to do that. Sorry. Yeah, there's lots of things I could talk about there about ways to, programming whatever exactly the problem is you're having, like a way to program to make sure that it's there before you deploy the stack, just so you can make sure that it's there. But you've probably thought of all those. So Tom, there for the YAML for Docker service, all this happening in the background, in case you didn't realize, Docker stack simply creates Docker services for you, right? So I'm not sure why you think services are better or what advantage services have for you, but there's nothing Stacks can do that, like, Stacks is actually a command line. It's not even an API component. Right now, the way when you type a command line Stacks, it takes that YAML, it converts it into service commands, and then it checks to see if that service command would be the same thing as what you're already running, and that's how it knows. It basically diffs that output, and it knows the difference between what you have and what you want to do, so it knows whether or not to recreate them. But really, in the background, it's just talking to the service API, doing the same thing as service commands. Hey, Bret, as a beginner with Docker, what would be a good project to work on and present it for possible employers? I do not have Docker work experience, and I'm starting learning 2 months ago. First, I would say the steps are definitely get yourself on GitHub, start creating repos of everything you're learning on GitHub, and then go and find anything you're interested in. It has to be stuff you're interested in, because if I just randomly say things that you know nothing about, then you're probably not going to be as motivated as stuff that you are excited about. So do you want to run a blog? Well, then learn how to spin up Docker in WordPress or in Ghost. I like Ghost. Or maybe something like Hugo, which is a static blog system. Go pick a bunch of different blogging systems. And then those things have databases. So then make your own custom Docker files, make your own compose files, document it in a README, make it an example as if you were handing it out, right? Like make it like you were giving it to someone else so they could learn Docker. And then put all that stuff in a README, then make some repos. And that way, when you go to the interview, you don't have an empty GitHub profile. If you're trying to be anywhere related to a developer in most companies, they're going to probably look you up before you even get interviewed, and they're probably going to look up your GitHub profile. Do you have one? Have you done anything on GitHub? Have you made issues in anyone else's GitHub repos? If you've been a part of any open source project, have you put anything on GitHub? And so I would do that. So, just go through all of the official, if I gave you a really long homework assignment, it would be go look up the Docker official images. All right. So the Docker official images is a list of close to 200 open source projects. A lot of them are databases, web apps, stuff like that. And just go through the entire library. I'll put this link in chat. Entire link thing in the library. Sorry, go to this entire library. And for each one of these, go look it up on Docker Hub. Learn a couple of things about it, like learn what it is, and then try to deploy it. And then take the commands, put them in a README in a GitHub repo. Maybe make some examples about how do I deploy Caddy, which is a proxy system. How do I deploy Caddy with all of the right environment variables in a Docker command? Put that in a README file, put that in a GitHub repo, and make that like your homework. So put all your homework public is basically what I'm saying. And at least you'll have something, right? You'll have stuff out there. Then if you're wanting to be specific to any particular language, if you're looking for jobs that are specific to maybe Node.js or Python or something like that, then I would say just simply look for that language and demo apps or sample apps, just Google around and you'll find projects, right? Just do something like to do demo. So, or here's one. So, for example, this is a very common example of how to use front-end frameworks, and it's written in all these different languages, and it's basically the exact same app, but written on a bunch of different languages. Now, it's a pretty simplistic example. You might go look up something complicated, like I think Weave sample. Where do they have it? Sock Shop. There we go. The Sock Shop this is a really advanced one, by the way. It's got lots of stuff to it. So Sock Shop is another one. Basically, if you Google around, you will find the popular ones because they'll have a lot of GitHub stars. They'll talk about Docker in them. And then some of them aren't Dockerized, which means it'll be more advanced because you'll have to figure out how to put it in Docker containers, and that'll teach you a lot as well. So, yep, there's tons out there. I quickly the other day was going through and just looking up some examples, and I found 10 different major distributed computing examples by just searching distributed computing demo apps or, microservice demo apps and stuff like that, and you'll find a bunch. I would try all of them. And I would try some of the easy ones, and I would try some of the hard ones. Not all of them are going to be easy to set up in an hour. Some of them might take you days to get working correctly, and that's all a part of the learning. Is the hard stuff is important too, because that's when you get to production, these are always the smallest apps can be hard in production. So you definitely want to learn a lot of that stuff. To be DevOps, what is more recommended? That I continue to strengthen myself in software architecture and development or in networking? That's a great question. So my background is going to be different than your background. So I'm always going to have preferences that are different than yours, right? If I'm hiring someone, I come from the operations and system administration background. So when I hire someone, I'm looking for someone with systems experience and someone with networking experience. So I would always prefer that you go take a networking course. Go get a Cisco certification. Cisco has a very basic certification you can get that only requires you understand a few basic networking command lines with their routers, maybe a dozen of them. And you can do all that stuff in virtual software now anyway. And it forces you to learn things like TCP packets and routing and what is a switch and what is a hub. What does a bridge do? What does a gateway do? A TCP gateway or IP gateway rather. Okay, but that's not all DevOps jobs. The problem is the word DevOps is labeled on everything. And I'm part of that problem, but we label DevOps on a wide part of the ecosystem that has everything to do between a developer committing code and everything after that until it's running on a server and the users are using it. And then it keeps going, right? Monitoring, rolling updates, metrics, business key value or key metrics for business goals and stuff like that. Like there's all this other stuff. You can even talk about project management and agile parts of DevOps. But so the point is that you need to know not just a DevOps job. You can't just apply for every DevOps job. I would not be good in every DevOps job because there's a wide range of these kind of jobs. So you're going to have to decide what you want to do. Do you maybe want to be more on the developer side, focusing on build tools like continuous integration, continuous deployment, focusing on that? Or you want to be more ops focused and say, I'm going to focus on building Kubernetes clusters and knowing the internals of Docker and troubleshooting Linux kernel problems? Or do you want to be more on the security side and say, I want to, focus on security tools? There's all different ways you can take it. So I would say decide what parts of that you want to do and just pick one of those. And I give a pretty good walkthrough. Let's see, Bret.show DevOps. So I have a URL for you. That's a pretty good example of what I recommend to most students that are going to focus on container tools. Because people that are taking my courses right now, they're all focused on container tools. So that is not all of DevOps, right? That's just a small portion of DevOps. But I go through a lot of my thoughts talking about why DevOps is more than just learning a couple of tools and why it's important to learn things. I'm a big fan of learning networking and learning one programming language, just a little bit, even if you're not a developer, and then learning one way to deploy infrastructure. Let's say Terraform. Okay, just the basics, right? And then learn the basics of one cloud. So learn the basics of AWS. Learn how to create a server, make some security routes, security networks, security groups, what they call them. Open up some firewall ports, connect to a database, learn some of that basic stuff on a cloud. It doesn't mean go learn all the different stuff, right? It just means learn one tool in each area. Learn one continuous integration tool, maybe Jenkins, maybe Circle CI, something like that. And just learn the basics of it, right? Because if you learn the basics of each one of those tools, you're going to be much more useful once you decide what you like. Because once you know what you like and you realize, holy cow, I really love continuous integration. I just love diving into better testing, faster testing, smaller Docker images, shipping code faster is what I'm all about, right? And if that's what you really get into, then great. And there's DevOps people that focus on that exclusively. And then there's others that only manage Kubernetes servers and focusing on rolling updates and faster updates. And they're considered part of the DevOps team, right? They're part of that workflow, but they have nothing to do with, building images or testing. So I hope that helps. Thanks. I'm glad you like the background. Yeah, for the earlier question about to not use sudo on K8s host. Yeah, I'm not really sure. If you're going to run Kubernetes on a host and you don't have sudo, there's ways to do it. You can use kind. Kind runs on Docker, but you're going to have Docker. And then to have Docker, you've basically a root. You don't have to. It doesn't mean you have to run sudo. You can always add yourself to the sudo file so that you don't have to run it. So yeah, I'm not really sure what that question was all about. Maybe we'll come back to it here in a minute. There's a trend now to deploy multiple smaller K8s clusters since tooling to manage K8s have gotten much better. What are your thoughts on this? Single large K8s versus multiple smaller K8s deployments. I'm all about smaller K8s deployments, especially if you're in the cloud and you don't have to pay for the infrastructure, right? Like building and managing the control plane yourself is tedious and expensive because you have to have at least 3 servers doing that job, and you want them to be fast. So if you're doing something like Rancher, then you have to manage those servers. If you're doing something like EKS, then you don't have to manage those servers. Now, so I am a fan of smaller, what I would say is many small clusters. I would find that there's a happy place there somewhere between maybe, you know, 10 nodes and 50 nodes, somewhere in that range, that I would feel comfortable in the size of your, you don't want to have 5 different Kubernetes clusters that are only 4 nodes, right? Or 2 nodes or something like that. But at the same time, one of the reasons that people are nervous about large Kubernetes clusters is because they never have to replace them. And they're never have to upgrade them, or they're worried to upgrade them. And so I would be, to me, the size of the cluster is a little bit irrelevant once my team is thoroughly practiced the art, and it is definitely an art, of upgrading or replacing clusters. Because that should be a part of any Kubernetes implementation is, how do we upgrade this thing? Let's test it. Let's install the old versions and upgrade to the current version. Let's do that while our application is getting hammered with, Apache bench connections, thousands a minute, right? Just hammering it with connections. And I'm going to do an upgrade. And if we get any failures inside of our application testing, then the upgrade failed, right? Like, we never want our Kubernetes upgrades to, that's why a lot of people don't do Kubernetes upgrades. They do Kubernetes replacements. So they have two clusters running side by side, and they will have a load balancer in front that will slowly, it doesn't technically move the connections. It will start moving all new connections over to the new cluster, and it will leave the old connections on the old cluster until they all time out. And then once all those connections are done, then the old cluster can go away. So some people prefer that method because it's, we're trying to get to this world where we're not changing state of our infrastructure. We're simply replacing infrastructure, not changing the state of infrastructure. And so technically upgrading upgrading on a server is considered changing the state, kind of like a patch upgrade. A lot of people go so far as to say that they're never going to patch servers, they're only going to replace nodes. And the reason that approach is beneficial, although it's a lot more work, is that it's the same process to replace a failed machine as it is to upgrade a machine. It's bring up a new one, take down the old one. Bring up a new one, take down the old one. And if your whole team is used to that and they've thoroughly tested it, then bringing up a new cluster, taking down an old one, bringing up a new cluster, taking down an old one. So that way, when the cluster breaks, it might be just easier for you to replace it instead of troubleshooting it and trying to figure out how to bring it back alive from the dead, right? Because the people that spend their days just trying to bring a thing back up, like a Kubernetes cluster, it's usually because they have no easy or reliable method to spin up a new one. Their methodology is all around keeping that one thing up, not about rapidly deploying new things. And as we get more and more into containers, what are containers doing, right? When we replace a container, we are creating a brand new image. It's a fresh image, and then we're swapping out the old one for the new one. So why don't we do that for our servers? And then once you're comfortable with that, you do that for your clusters. And then once you're comfortable with that, who knows what's next? Maybe you do completely new completely new VPCs, right? Brand new VPC every time we do an update to our cluster or something like that. But that's where this is all going, is that we don't have two types of state, right? We get everything to one workflow, and whether it's failure or updating, it's the same workflow each time. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I nailed the Moodle question. A+. Yeah, it's related to network latency. So from an earlier question talking about NFS and network latency, and the lock of the session files, moving session files to Redis makes the application work again. It was okay if everything was in a VM or in a container. Yeah, so that makes great sense because, often shared state of files doesn't work, right? There's very few applications out there that are designed to all read or write to the same file at the same time. And read and write locks are a thing, and that's that's why we use sockets for multi connection. So I'm glad I helped. I like helping. Is there any tool that converts or breaks Docker Compose files into Kubernetes? Yeah, we just talked about that, Maz. Actually, you were probably here when I talked about it. That was the Compose tool with a K. That'll help you. The auto-generated Spanish subtitles. Oh, thanks, Dave. The auto-generated Spanish subtitles are so bad that it's confusing. Well, that's unfortunate. So if you can get, okay, so Google translate the English subtitles, because the English subtitles, our team edits those down to every word. So the English subtitles are not auto-generated. The English subtitles in my courses, unlike almost every other course on the planet, mine are not auto-generated. We start with the auto-generated, and then we have a whole dedicated part of the team, Kathy and Beth. They edit that stuff. This is, if in case you've ever seen Kathy around on any of our, we haven't had one lately, but sometimes we've had little group pictures or things that show up on some of our stuff. She's a part of our team and does all of our captioning. If you're watching, Kathy, thank you so much for all that you do, as well as other things for us. But she will hand edit that English closed captioning on every one of the files down to the point where there shouldn't be any word wrong, essentially. It should be exactly word for word what I'm saying, even if what I'm saying is wrong, which is a problem. But so I would say the Spanish subtitles in Udemy are automated translations from that, but the Google Translate might be better for you if you can get it to work. So that would be my next recommendation. I'm going to have to play with it to see why I can't get them, why it doesn't work for me on Google Translate. It used to work for me. So sorry about that. We looked into getting some of our languages actually hand edited, and it's for a course that's 19 hours, it's very expensive. So we have opted out of that, and I have, we've got 3 languages that are all, very similar in the number of users. So it would be a lot. It would be a lot of money for, I think, essentially asking people to hand edit what would end up being about 60 plus hours of video. That's a lot. So we're only at this point able to do the one language by hand. Hopefully the robots will get better though, and we will have better Spanish subtitles. 2 requests. Traffic tutorial as a main proxy manager on the Docker host. Couldn't find useful ones. I'm not sure. Traffic tutorial as a main proxy manager. So I don't really have a proxy tutorial that I'm going to have to be able to recommend to you. I mean, I have tons of stuff where I talk about traffic, and I have tons of examples on GitHub. If you looked at my DockerCon 19, I have a traffic example, I think. If you saw my latest example, that's an example for using Docker Compose. But for example, this one, this repo right here, if you were here the last couple of months, I covered this several times. It's for Docker Compose. It's not for production. It really comes down to, in case you maybe don't know about this one, dogs versus cats. So my dogs versus cat repo has traffic examples. Some of them are still traffic 1.7 or whatever the last one was, but some of them have been updated to 2.0 releases because they did change the traffic stuff for version 2. I would say those, and then I don't really have anything better after that. I know I get a lot of questions about traffic, so at some point I might just do a traffic course, but it's not going to be this year because we've got so many plans. I won't be able to do it, but hopefully that helps. I think other people are answering this question for you, but if you're new to Docker, take my courses. There's a link right up there. Get all the coupons. Docker Mastery is the way to go. I designed that course for people new to Docker. So you can get that for less than $20 American dollars with a coupon. And the coupon is up there on that site. All right. Proper setup to build a multiple pipeline for different platforms. Development, staging, and production, and how more development for any of these platforms. What is the proper setup to build a multiple pipelines for different platforms, and how to move deployment from any of these phases to the other? Dev or prod? Dev to prod. Well, there's lots of images. Okay, so There is no single proper setup. That's the problem. That's why there's no real immediate guide, or like there's not one reference that you can make, is because there is not anything like that. It's a mess of tools and a mess of processes, but generally, if you just look up something, see if I can find an image. See if I can find, by searching Docker CI pipeline on Google. So, well, here's an example of one in the Docker documentation. So in this image, you've got, it's showing a bunch. It's like, what does this mean? What does this image even mean? I don't even know, but I'm going to guess. So you've got, it's showing here the registry as the central point. This registry in the middle, it looks like I guess that's a bookshelf. That is the registry where all your images are stored. So generally, the workflow is something about, developers commit code that goes into a code repo somewhere. Then that notifies a continuous integration solution. There's 1,000 of them. There's some here listed: GitLab, Circle CI. You got Azure on there, Visual Studio, whatever that product's called, Teams something. You got Jenkins. You got 1,000 different options there. Drone, Travis. So CodeShip. There's just so many. You got Jenkins X, which is totally not related to Jenkins. But anyway, all those things are designed to test your code and build your images. So you're going to build the image in a Docker container, and then you're going to test, doing all the application testing that your dev team is telling you to do. And then if all those tests pass, then you're pushing that image to a registry. And then that same pipeline is going to either pass it off to a continuous deployment tool, or quite often that tool itself will do the deployment. And that deployment can be one of a dozen different things. It could be Docker, it could be Kubernetes, it could be something on AWS. It could be using a tool like Terraform or Ansible to do it. It could be using the native tools like the kube control apply command with a manifest YAML. It could be using Kubernetes with something like Customize, or Customize or Helm. It could create it could use a Helm chart. There's just so many different tools out there. I can't give you one way to do it. General order of things though are: code gets built in an image, code gets tested in an image. If passed, code goes to a registry. Then there might be extra steps there, like security audits or other things that you might throw in. But generally, that next step is it deploys to a staging server of some sort, where you might have either automated or human-based testing. And then once you get the production sign-off, there's probably another pipeline that shoots that same image that was put in the staging into a production server, either through command lines or through APIs, just depending on the tools you're using. So that's why it's so hard to teach the pipeline, the CI stuff, is it depends on the languages, the expertise that you have, because you're probably going to all use the tools the tools that your company already bought, the languages that you're using when you're developing, the servers that you already own, and it's just, there's so much to it. And then I'm telling you, every project I'm on is different. I have not been on 2 projects that are using the same process. And I have been on, just in the last 5 years, probably 50 projects, or at least related. I've been related somehow to a project, either giving advice or a member of the project, or the last 5, 6, 7 years, probably about 50. So there's a lot that you can do there. And unfortunately, I don't have an easy answer. But that's a great question, and someone should make a course on it. People are attempting to make courses, but what they're doing is they're just saying, here's a course where I teach you how to use Jenkins and Terraform to deploy Kubernetes, right? But that's just those 3 tools. Any one of those tools might change, and then that you wouldn't be able to use that course to do that. So you would end up having to make like a dozen or 2 dozen courses, really, to show how each one of the tools relates. And there can be, you could have a pipeline that has 5 steps in it or 50 or 75 steps. I've seen pipelines that have to build an image for Windows, an image for ARM, an image for Linux, and then test it on all 3. And then it deploys it to different servers for humans to manually approve. And then once they approve it, it kicks off. They do something in a Git repo, and then it kicks off the next stage of the pipelines. Like, it's just, it takes forever. And they're really complicated. So I'm hopeful that doesn't stress you out, and it just it's not. It's easy to start small. If someone asked me today, I have a simple app, I have a simple requirements, I just want them to go in production and be tested, I would say, okay, well, if you don't have any preference of tools, if you don't already know tools, you're going to use Docker, use GitHub Actions, store your code in GitHub, deploy your images on Docker Hub, or maybe GitHub image registry now, but Docker Hub's still the easiest, I think. And then deploy your containers on whatever you're comfortable with, like whatever cloud that you're already using. So that's probably what I would pick. It doesn't mean that the other tools aren't great. GitLab is great, but it's probably a lot more work if you don't already have GitLab, because it does a lot of things. And Circle CI is great, but if your code's already on GitHub, you might just check out if GitHub Actions is good enough. I want to install a big blue button, and I need to run system control in a container. Right now, I'm having an error. Is it possible to run that system control commands? I'm using Ubuntu 16. Honestly, I don't use system control. I mean, I don't use systemd essentially in a container. What you need to, it's not that you can't. There might be some special way to do it. If I have to use a startup program, I use what is it called? Got to look up my repo here. So I have a repo for PHP where I use supervisor. And so check out my Docker files and my supervisor dconfigs here. So that might help you use supervisor instead of systemd. Because I've never tried using systemd. I don't see why it wouldn't work, but I just can't help you with that. And then also look up how to run multiple services in a container, which is a great page on the Docker docs. So this page in the Docker docs will clue you in on a couple of methods. It gives you down at the bottom the supervisor way, which supervisor is like a lightweight systemd. It's basically the same thing. So I like supervisor, and it's just, I find it's the one that Docker preferred. It was a little more lightweight. It doesn't try to do everything. And I thought that the supervisor file, for example, that I used to spin up multiple applications was pretty easy to understand, right? So this file right here, it's a whole 43 lines, and it spins up Nginx, PHP FPM. It actually runs the supervisor control socket, because you have to have a socket listening for, if you're going to use systemd, you got to have that systemd socket so that your system control can talk to it, right? So you got to have that in there. So I'm doing that same thing with supervisor. And then I'm also enabling an HTTP server. And the reason that's important is because now that you have something that's the root process and it's spinning up other processes, then you also need to monitor it. So I would spin up this ability for me to connect in and do health checks on my supervisor, which would be the root process. And yeah, that's how I did it. So I'm not saying it's better than systemd. Systemd might be better. Every single Linux system I use has systemd as its core init, so it's fine. I just used supervisor in this case, and it's the example I have. So, hope that helps. All right. Second question. I have multiple commands to run in my image for my container to work properly. Is it better to create my own image with the specific run command? I have multiple commands to run in my image for my container to work properly. Is it better to create my own image with specific run commands or any other way with a stack? So yeah, I would always create my own images. I mean, if I have run commands, I would always put them in my own image. Absolutely. Yes, I would put those on Docker Hub or any other way with a stack. So I'm assuming you're talking about a swarm stack and you want to run maybe someone else's image and you want specific run commands. So I'm curious about what those run commands would be, right? Because if it's something that you just simply need, it's a quick thing, it runs really quick, and you just need to do something during startup of the container, you might consider just overwriting the entry point and the CMD of their Docker file. It doesn't require you to have your own Docker file or build your own image. Simply look up entry point and CMD in the docs and in the Docker docs, and then you can find ways that they run scripts. There's a thing called entry point scripts. You can even look up ways that that's already happening in some of the official images. For example, if you go look up the MySQL official image, you will find out that that image itself has its own entry point scripts that do all sorts of cool things on the first startup. Like it creates the default user, it adds the password that you set, it creates the default database based on the name that you give it. It does all this stuff. And then you can give it other files that you bind mount in a directory, and it will auto run those files. So that's something that MySQL does. Postgres does the same thing. Other applications might do the same thing. I think now even Nginx does that. So you might look at the entry point stuff because you might be able to get around creating your own image by simply customizing the entry point and the CMD. So check those out. Hope that helps. You're most welcome, Stefan. Let's see. To become a DevOps engineer, one more doubt. Is it enough to master in Docker, or does it require other tools? Because recruiters asking for Docker, K8s, Terraform, and AWS or Azure, all these. Well, you can't be a master at any of those. I have not met anyone that's a master of all of those. So you're going to have to pick one to be good at, right? Recruiters generally have no idea what they're talking about, and they have no idea how complicated these things are. So their job with a recruiter is simply to get your foot in the door of an interview. Now, a lot of times when you're interviewing, you're going to probably just do a spray and pray approach, where you just simply you put your resume everywhere. You want to interview for anyone that will take the interview, and that's fine, but expect in the DevOps world to get a lot of interviews that you will not meet the expectations of. The same thing would happen to me if I did that now, right? If I just took every job, if I listed all the technologies that I've worked with over the last decade, it would be a lot, but I'm certainly not an expert in all of them or even most of them. So if that job expected me to be an expert in Python, Azure DevOps, and let me think of something else, and Puppet, I would not get that job, right? I've used those tools, but I am not an expert in any of them. So I would probably not be their first hire. But maybe they're looking for a junior person who has a understanding of all these tools to a certain level, and they really only want someone that's good, like, intermediate level knowledge of someone who knows Docker, because maybe their team has all the other expertise, but they're just now getting started with containers. And this is how I get clients now. They're teams of really smart people who don't know yet how to do containers. They know everything else in their tool set way better than I would ever know. But they need to know Docker, and they don't have any experience in it, and they don't have the budget to permanently hire a new employee. They figure that they can train their staff on the tool, but then they also want a consultant part-time, just temporarily, to help them get over the hump of the learning of that tool and then implementing it, basically making them go faster in their projects. So if you can think about the potential job you might find, you could find a DevOps job that simply requires you to be really good at Terraform or really good at Docker. And when I say really good, obviously if you're just getting into DevOps, for you, you can't expect to get a senior DevOps job, right? So they have to have realistic expectations too. If you don't have experience, and your resume should be very clear about that, right? You shouldn't lie on your resume and pretend you had jobs you don't. But I have hired junior people all the time that don't have the direct experience that I need, because we talked about this the other week. They've got some good stuff on GitHub. They're clearly playing with open source. They understand how Git works. They understand how to make commits. They know about infrastructure as code. They've made some YAML. They've created some Docker files. They've done some basics on all these different things. They've played a little bit with a lot of it. They can show off projects they've deployed. I might even ask them, hey, what was the last project you deployed for learning? And tell me about it. Tell me what you did. And I would want them to go through it. And I don't really care that they're not an expert in all those tools yet. What I'm more caring about, and what really good hiring managers care more about, is how do you learn and how often do you learn? So they're going to be asking lots of questions about the things you've learned this month, this year, especially during COVID where we're all stuck at home. How is your home lab set up? What tools have you learned in 2020, and what are you excited about learning next? Those are the kind of things that can key a good hiring manager into, will this person fit in my team long term, or am I just hiring somebody that happens to know the one thing I need right now, and they may never know anything else again? They may never learn anything new, because you can't do that in DevOps, right? It's a constant learning process. Everything is new. So I would worry more about that. And I would say that there are, I would not learn Kubernetes until you have a thorough understanding of Docker and Terraform and AWS. I would say do AWS first, simply because if you don't have a job you're going after and you don't have experience on any of these things, AWS is going to be the majority. Terraform is going to be the majority. Docker is going to be the majority. Not everyone's using Kubernetes yet, right? But most people are using, I would say more than any other, people are using AWS, Terraform, and Docker, like those three. Plus, you need to know a CI tool. So learn how continuous integration works and create one of your example projects with continuous integration and Docker and on AWS using Terraform. And just do that a couple of times. And then put all that stuff on GitHub so you can show it off whenever you have that job interview. And good luck. Good luck in the job interviews. All right. Hello. Hello for all the newcomers. So we have got 7 minutes left in this 2-hour live stream. Can I get through all the questions? So we're going to do rapid fire, which means, unfortunately, that I may not give you the long answer, but hopefully I'll give you a good one. Okay. Robin, let's see. If you're a master at one cloud environment and Docker, K8s, and Terraform, and or Ansible, I bet you're. Oh, it's not a question. Yes, you're answering. Good answer, Robin. Thank you. I completely agree with that. I'd also learn Python or Go. Yeah, and in fact, just learn any automation language. If whatever one you started with, Node.js is used quite often in Node teams to automate things. Bash is used in teams that are very Linuxy. If they're old Linux graybeards, like I'm becoming, they might prefer Bash. And so I'd say really just learn one. The problem with Go is that a lot of jobs, the teams don't even know about Go. I've never touched it. And every once in a while, I keep running into people that don't know about Go, which is, if you live in this world of DevOps, you think, how could they not know about Go? But there's a lot of stuff going on out there, right? Not everybody knows about this stuff. So I would say if you're simply worried about learning to get into a job, learn the stuff that most people would likely know. But Robin's strategy might work for you. It might be better, who knows, to do Go, and then you're so leading edge and you've made a couple of really simple little apps in Go, that they're going to be like, man, you know Go as well? Like, you must be amazing. We must hire you because you know the coolest, latest stuff. So I don't know. It just kind of depends on the hiring manager and what they're looking for. I would say learn each thing to sort of an intermediate level, meaning you've passed my courses, you've taken at least 2 courses on any one thing, you've made some pet projects in them, and then I would pick one of those tools and learn the shit out of it. I would take one thing that you are most excited about. Maybe it's Kubernetes, maybe it's Terraform, maybe it's Python, maybe whatever. Maybe it's Linux, Ubuntu internals. Maybe it's one of those things. And I would get as nerdy as I could. And so when you're in your interview, you make a point of talking a little bit or just hinting at how much you know on that one topic. Because if you can kind of show your inner nerd, if you sort of let your inner nerd out about one particular thing, that might resonate with them as, oh, this person's really passionate about that. And, and don't fake it. Like if you don't know stuff, don't pretend you know it. But, don't be scared to say, hey, this, is one thing I really get into a lot. And let me just show you some of the things I've been working on GitHub. I got some open source over here I can show you. Yeah, do that. I like it. Oh, Dave, I could volunteer to translate. I'm bilingual, and I wanted the subtitles to people I recommended the course that are just Spanish speakers. Thanks for the answer. Dave, hit me up on Twitter or a DM in Twitter, or if you're in the Udemy Slack, or if you, my email is Bret@bretfisher.com. I'm happy to talk more about it. If you're really interested in a little part-time job for a little bit, I'm happy to talk about it. Like, let's see what we can come up with. I can talk to my people and see what we can do. Because I'm always about, if we can get more, if we can get better translations, especially for the popular languages, German, French, Portuguese, Spanish. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that are. I think that's my big top ones. Yeah, and they're all automatic converted right now. So, thanks for the Antonis. Thank you. That's very nice. I'm wondering if we can deploy them in IoT. Certainly, Docker can work on IoT. You can look up Raspberry Pi, and it just depends on the IoT platform and whether someone's built it for that platform. So there's a lot of different IoT platforms, and obviously there's not an official Docker release or a pet. You got to look for the pet projects of people that are building the Docker Golang. Basically, if there's a Go compiler for that, then you can probably run Docker on it. Pros and cons of GitHub Actions over Azure DevOps. I am not smart on either, so I will not be the good person to answer that question. I'm looking forward to getting into GitHub Actions, but I would say that GitHub Actions are probably not as good as Azure DevOps. Again, not an expert, just based on the reactions of people that are using Azure DevOps. If you're on Azure, like I would expect Azure DevOps to be a sweet spot. GitHub Actions is a little more raw on, it's not going to have all the full-fledged features of a lot of these high-end continuous integration systems, but if you're already on GitHub and you don't want to have to learn something else, then that's kind of where GitHub Actions is at, right? That's where a lot of the GitHub stuff is. It's not the best issues database, but if you're already on GitHub, it works, right? Would Supervisor D and System D in such an approach make sure that Docker would kill once any of the services go down? Yeah, well, the idea there with Supervisor and System D is that if you have multiple applications you need to run in the same container, maybe you're running PHP FPM plus Nginx in my example, then they both ideally need to be talking over a Unix socket. So ideally they're in the same container, or if in Kubernetes they can technically be in separate containers in the same pod. But in Docker alone, they're going to have to be together in the same container. So in that way, yes, you need that root process that's going to manage the restart of all the other processes. So if you've got systemd or supervisor running as that root process in the container, then it would be it'd be the one in control that Docker would be killing, right? Docker would be killing it. Oh, what's up, Jeff? Jeff is back. Another Docker captain on the chat. Whoever runs Big Blue Button. Just curious, out of curiosity, what is the motivation? I've not heard of this thing. What is this Big Blue Button? Web conferencing, open source web conferencing. I have not heard of this thing. Is it cool? Is it good? All right. Yet another project on the long list of projects to go check out. All right, so we have hit the 2-hour mark, and Jeff is going to end up being the last on the broadcast. Also saying expert is absolutely relative to the people in the room, which is why I'm never an expert. I'm just a guy who talks a lot. And solid networking basics, yes. Networking, all of the things. In fact, I think if I was in charge of an IT department, and I have never been there, but if I was, I would probably mandate everyone go through a TCP IP course, and like we would host big classes for a year where everybody, like 1/10 of the whole department, would go through it, because learning the fundamentals of packet routing, how things move around between applications and through computers and networks, is so fundamental to everything we do nowadays, that I think it helps everyone. It helps the desktop support tech. It helps the developer. It helps the sysadmin, the operator, when they can do things like ping a port and understand what the heck that is. Understand the difference between UDP and TCP. Like the differences, the fundamental differences between those, what packet sizes normally are. I mean, there's just such a good amount of knowledge there that I take for granted, because I had to build those networks 25 years ago. So I had to do it from scratch. We were converting from ThinNet and ThickNet to TCP, and no one else knew it. So I had to read the book from Barnes & Noble, and I think I probably sat in Barnes & Noble and read it, because I probably didn't want to pay the $50. I couldn't afford it on my U.S. Navy salary. So I read it, but I think I ended up buying it because I had to take it to work to show people, to prove to them things like, what is SMTP? Nobody knew. So I have that benefit. Because I'm old, I get to have all that knowledge, and hopefully some of it's still in my head. But for those of you that are not that old, I highly recommend taking a networking course, passing like a Network Plus exam, maybe going and getting that CCNA Cisco cert. That is still a highly respected certificate in the community. Just that some of those really basic, I'm assuming they still have the CCNA, the really basic Cisco ones that are just about routing fundamentals and switch fundamentals, networking fundamentals. So thanks again for watching my show, coming and hanging out, asking all the questions. We've had, on YouTube, we've had 700 people playing back this video. That is crazy. So I thank you so much for showing up. Again, you can support me on Patreon, like I just showed you. That's where this show gets all the love. You can also just scroll down, click the follow button, which will basically allow you to get all of my updates of things I'm creating, things I'm doing, without having to pay for it, and without all of the internet social media madness, right? So it's like a private little stream without getting emails from me all the time. So you can do that, or you can buy me a coffee every month, and we will be sending out here in the next few days the High Fivers Club schedule for the monthly meetup, where we all hang out on Zoom and just talk about what we're working on in DevOps. So that's fun, and you can be a part of that if you jump onto Patreon and sign up for being a member and supporting this podcast and live show. Ciao.